Picture this. You're standing in the shadows of a marble corridor, your heart pounding as silk slippers whisper against polished floors. The year is 1745, and through ornate doorways draped in crimson velvet, you glimpse scenes that would make even the most jaded aristocrat blush with shame. Candles flicker against gold-leafed walls, while the most powerful nobles in Europe shed more than just their political facades. The air hangs thick with perfume and something far more intoxicating, the scent of absolute power unleashed from all moral restraint. Tonight, you're about to witness the hidden world that existed behind the public ceremonies and diplomatic receptions. A world where crowns were cast aside for crowns of a different nature, where treaties were signed with more than just ink, and where the corridors of power became theatres of flesh. This isn't the sanitized version of European history you learned in school. This is the untold story of how the continent's most influential palaces became stages for elaborate rituals that would shock modern sensibilities and reshape the very foundations of political power. Before diving into these forbidden chronicles of excess and influence, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths behind history's greatest mysteries, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more revelations like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these secret chambers of power together from different corners of the world, connected across centuries by our shared fascination with the truth behind the throne. The palace walls of 18th century Europe contained secrets that would make today's political scandals seem like children's games. Behind the gilded facades and manicured gardens lay a shadow world where diplomacy merged with desire, where alliances were forged through intimate encounters, and where the most private moments became instruments of statecraft. These weren't random acts of debauchery. They were calculated performances designed to cement power, gather intelligence, and maintain the delicate balance of European politics through the most primal of human connections. The French court at Versailles set the standard for this hidden dimension of aristocratic life. King Louis XV, who ruled France from 1715 to 1774, transformed portions of his magnificent palace into what courtiers whispered about as the deer park. This wasn't a hunting ground for animals, but a carefully curated collection of young women from noble families across Europe, each selected for their beauty, discretion, and political connections. The king didn't simply collect these women as trophies. He orchestrated elaborate scenarios where visiting diplomats, potential allies, and even enemies would find themselves drawn into compromising situations that could later be leveraged for political advantage. The architecture itself was designed to facilitate these encounters. Secret passages connected private apartments to hidden chambers where conversations could be overheard and intimate moments could be witnessed by carefully positioned observers. The famous Hall of Mirrors wasn't just a showcase of French craftsmanship. It was a surveillance system where reflective surfaces allowed hidden watchers to monitor the activities of unsuspecting guests. Every surface that seemed decorative served a dual purpose in the palace's elaborate network of political seduction and espionage. Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's most famous mistress, understood this system better than anyone. She wasn't merely the king's lover, she was the chief architect of a network that extended throughout European high society. Her private salons became recruitment centres where she identified potential participants for the palace's more exclusive entertainments. Women of lesser nobility found themselves invited to intimate gatherings where their beauty and charm could serve the broader interests of French foreign policy. Men of influence discovered that their invitations to certain palace events came with expectations that extended far beyond diplomatic conversation. The ritualized nature of these encounters followed patterns that had been refined over decades. New arrivals at court would be gradually introduced to increasingly exclusive circles, each level requiring greater commitment and deeper compromise. What began as elegant dinner parties would evolve into more intimate gatherings, then private entertainments, and finally elaborate ceremonies that bound participants together through shared secrets and mutual vulnerability. The progression was so subtle that many participants never realized how completely they had become enmeshed in the system until escape was impossible. The Austro-Hungarian Empire developed its own variation of these practices under Empress Maria Theresa, though her approach differed significantly from the French model. Rather than the elaborate theatrical productions favoured at Versailles, the Habsburg court preferred more intimate gatherings that emphasized intellectual discourse alongside physical intimacy. The Empress understood that the minds of her guests were as important to capture as their bodies, so her private entertainments often began with philosophical discussions, poetry readings, and musical performances before transitioning to more carnal pursuits. The Spanish court under Charles III created perhaps the most ritualized version of palace entertainment, drawing inspiration from both French excess and Habsburg refinement, while adding distinctly Spanish elements rooted in the country's complex relationship with Catholicism. The resulting ceremonies walked a razor's edge between sacred and profane, incorporating religious imagery and language into scenarios that would have scandalized the very church officials who had blessed them. Participants found themselves engaging in acts that felt simultaneously sinful and sanctified, creating psychological bonds that proved remarkably durable for political purposes. Catherine the Great's court in Russia took these concepts to their logical extreme, creating what foreign observers described as a parallel government where political decisions were made through intimate negotiations conducted in private chambers throughout the Winter Palace. The Empress herself participated actively in these arrangements, using her legendary appetites as tools of statecraft, while surrounding herself with carefully chosen favourites who served as both lovers and political advisors. Her famous collection of erotic art wasn't merely personal indulgence, it was a teaching tool used to educate participants in the elaborate rituals that governed her court. The intelligence value of these arrangements cannot be overstated. In an era before electronic surveillance or modern espionage techniques, the intimate moments shared between political figures provided unprecedented access to their true thoughts, fears, and intentions. Pillow talk revealed military strategies, trade negotiations, and succession plans that would never have been discussed in formal diplomatic settings. The careful documentation of these conversations created archives of intelligence that shaped European politics for generations. The recruitment process for these palace entertainments operated through networks that extended across national boundaries. Madame du Barry maintained correspondences with similar figures in Vienna, Madrid, and St. Petersburg, creating a continent-wide system for identifying and cultivating potential participants. Young nobles traveling on grand tours found themselves invited to exclusive gatherings in multiple capitals, each experience building upon the last, until they became willing participants in a system that transcended individual national interests. The economic implications of these arrangements were equally significant. The costs of maintaining elaborate private entertainment systems required enormous resources, but the political advantages gained often translated into favourable trade agreements, territorial concessions, and military alliances worth far more than their initial investment. The French court's annual budget for these activities reportedly exceeded the cost of maintaining entire military regiments, but the intelligence gathered and alliances forged through intimate diplomacy helped France maintain its position as Europe's dominant power for decades. The psychological techniques employed in these palace entertainments drew upon centuries of accumulated knowledge about human nature, desire, and manipulation. Court physicians studied the effects of various aphrodisiacs and mood-altering substances, while court artists created environments designed to lower inhibitions and encourage intimate behavior. The combination of luxury, novelty, and carefully calibrated social pressure proved remarkably effective at breaking down the reservations of even the most cautious participants. But these elaborate systems of palace entertainment were not without their dangers. The same intimate knowledge that made participants valuable intelligence sources also made them potential security threats. The delicate balance of mutual compromise that held these networks together could be shattered by a single participant willing to expose the system, threatening not just individual reputations, but the stability of entire governments. The precarious nature of these palace networks became starkly apparent when scandals occasionally erupted into public view, threatening to topple the very foundations of European diplomacy. The diamond necklace affair that engulfed Marie Antoinette in the 1780s was merely the tip of an iceberg that concealed far more explosive secrets. Court insiders whispered about hidden chambers beneath the palace where compromising materials were stored. Detailed records of every intimate encounter, every whispered confidence, every moment of vulnerability that could be weaponized against political enemies or unreliable allies. The women who participated in these elaborate schemes occupied a unique position in European society, wielding influence that operated entirely outside traditional power structures. They became shadow diplomats whose negotiations occurred in silk-draped alcoves rather than marble conference rooms. Their success depended not on noble birth or military prowess, but on their ability to extract secrets while appearing completely absorbed in pleasure. The most skilled among them maintained careful mental catalogues of information gathered during intimate moments, filing away details about troop movements, financial difficulties, and family scandals that could prove valuable months or even years later. The training required to excel in this shadow world was surprisingly sophisticated. Young women selected for advancement received instruction not only in the arts of seduction, but in languages, politics, and psychology. They learned to read micro-expressions, to detect lies through subtle changes in breathing or posture, and to guide conversations toward topics their handlers needed explored. The curriculum included memory techniques that allowed them to retain vast amounts of information without ever appearing to pay attention to anything beyond their immediate pleasure. The male participants faced their own complex challenges within these systems. Diplomats and nobles who found themselves drawn into palace entertainments had to navigate between their official duties and their private indulgences, while remaining constantly aware that every word, every gesture, every moment of weakness was being catalogued by unseen observers. The most successful learned to use these encounters to their own advantage, feeding carefully crafted misinformation to their hosts while appearing completely vulnerable and unguarded. The technological innovations that supported these elaborate deceptions were marvels of 18th century engineering. Hidden passages weren't simply built into palace walls. They incorporated sophisticated acoustic systems that could channel conversations from private chambers to listening posts located throughout the building. Mirrors were positioned with mathematical precision to provide multiple viewing angles of supposedly private encounters. Even the furniture was designed with concealment in mind, featuring hidden compartments where observers could position themselves to watch and record the activities of unsuspecting guests. The seasonal rhythms of European court life provided natural opportunities for these clandestine activities to intensify. Winter months, when travel was difficult and court attendance was at its highest, became periods of concentrated intelligence gathering. The elaborate masquerade balls that punctuated the social calendar weren't merely entertainment. They were cover for assignations and negotiations that would have been impossible during more formal court functions. The anonymity provided by elaborate costumes and masks allowed participants to engage in activities that would have been scandalous if the effects of palace entertainments extended far beyond the immediate participants conducted under their true identities. The RIP, influencing everything from military campaigns to marriage alliances across Europe. A single evening's gathering at Versailles might result in shifted troop deployments along the German border, altered trade policies affecting colonial possessions, or strategic marriages designed to cement political relationships forged in private chambers. The interconnected nature of European aristocracy meant that secrets gathered in one palace could influence decisions made in courts hundreds of miles away. The documentation systems that preserved records of these activities were themselves masterpieces of discretion and organization. Coded journals, encrypted correspondence, and elaborate filing systems ensured that sensitive information could be stored and retrieved without revealing its true nature to unauthorized observers. These shadow archives, creating cattle. Court librarians developed specialized skills in maintaining OGs that could guide handlers to exactly the information they needed, while appearing to casual observers as nothing more than routine administrative records. The gradual decline of these palace entertainment systems began in the late 18th century, as revolutionary movements across Europe challenged the fundamental assumptions that had supported aristocratic power. The French Revolution's emphasis on transparency and democratic accountability made the elaborate deceptions of court life increasingly difficult to maintain. The rise of professional diplomatic services reduced reliance on the informal intelligence networks that had operated through intimate encounters. Most significantly, changing social attitudes about privacy and consent began to challenge the ethical foundations upon which these systems had been built. Yet even as the Grand Palace entertainments faded into history, their influence continued to shape European politics in subtle but significant ways. The intelligence networks built through intimate encounters evolved into more conventional ESP techniques developed for manipulation services. The psychologicalulating participants in court entertainments found new applications in diplomatic negotiations and political campaigns. The understanding of human nature gained through decades of orchestrated seduction informed approaches to statecraft that would influence European politics well into the modern era. The architectural legacy of these activities remains visible today in the hidden passages, concealed chambers, and strategically positioned mirrors that still exist within Europe's great palaces. Tour guides carefully avoid mentioning the original purposes of these features, but observant visitors can still detect the subtle signs of surveillance systems designed to monitor the most private moments of historical figures whose public images have been carefully sanitized by centuries of historical revision. The personal costs paid by individual participants in these elaborate systems were enormous, though rarely acknowledged in historical accounts. Many found themselves trapped in networks of compromise and mutual dependence that made authentic relationships impossible. The constant performance required to maintain their positions took severe psychological tolls, leading to the kind of emotional isolation that wealth and power could not remedy. The most successful participants often paid for their influence with their capacity for genuine human connection, becoming so skilled at manipulation that sincerity became impossible. As we step back from those shadowed marble corridors, where silk slippers once whispered secrets across polished floors, we're left to contemplate the true cost of power when it operates beyond the reach of moral constraint. The elaborate networks of seduction and surveillance that flourished within Europe's most magnificent palaces reveal a disturbing truth about human nature when combined with absolute authority and unlimited resources. These weren't merely stories of excess and indulgence. They were systematic operations that shaped the destiny of nations through the most intimate of human vulnerabilities. The treaties signed in ornate conference rooms were often predetermined by negotiations conducted in silk-draped alcoves. The alliances that defined European politics for generations were forged not through noble ideals, but through carefully orchestrated moments of shared compromise and mutual destruction. The palaces that today welcome millions of tourists as monuments to architectural achievement once served as elaborate theatres where human dignity was sacrificed on the altar of political advantage. Behind every gilded surface and crystal chandelier lay hidden mechanisms designed to exploit the deepest needs and desires of those who wielded power over millions of lives. Perhaps most chilling of all is the recognition that these systems didn't emerge from individual depravity, but from the logical evolution of unchecked authority. When power becomes absolute and accountability disappears, even the most private aspects of human experience become tools of statecraft. The marble corridors that echo today with the footsteps of curious visitors once witnessed the systematic destruction of everything we consider sacred about human intimacy and trust. The ghosts of those elaborate entertainments still haunt Europe's great palaces, reminding us that power without moral constraint inevitably consumes not only its victims, but those who wield it, leaving behind only empty grandeur and the bitter knowledge of what was sacrificed in pursuit of dominance over others.